Brilliant. Hello, Carl, and welcome back. So for those of you that don't know, Carl, how long have we known each other, Carl?
Wow, it's been far too long. I don't want to admit the exact number of decades because it might age us.
Yes,
but it must be at
but
least
you had hair at the time.
Nearly.
And I had brown hair, absolutely. So as many people know, I'm the host and founder of the Accountants Millionaires Club. And Carl, you've been in and around the accountancy firms for how long?
Wow. So I started in practice as a 16-year-old, Heather. So yeah, that was back in 1997. And I remember when I was starting in accountancy, I would hear people say they've been in practice for 20 years. And I would think, how old are these people? And I'm coming up to saying 25 years, which is really quite scary.
Yeah, absolutely. So Carl has a lot of credits. I think the first credit is you were the one that named the Sage campaign by your book Boss It.
Probably.
Your best-selling, not just an Amazon best-selling, I've got all my mates to buy it on day one, but a proper W.H. Smith best-selling book. You're a brand ambassador for Practice Ignition. You're the chairperson at Dennis and Turnbull, D&T. And actually, there isn't much you haven't seen, haven't done. So what are we going to look at today? This is very much going to be a chat between Carl and myself. So I think it's pretty fair to say we've been around the block when it comes to pricing, haven't we, Carl?
We have.
Yes, and we both have a view, and we may not agree, by the way. So we're going to look at how to increase a client's fee by a real chunky amount and experience little or no pushback. And I think it's fair to say, Carl, a lot of people think you do these big clients, don't you, in D&T? Well, actually, the vast majority of your client base is tiny franchisees, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So to give a bit of flavour to where I'm coming from with this, our average client fee, the last time we calculated it, was £984 per year. So very much, I guess, bread and butter for the mass market. So yeah, whilst the perception is that we're working with big brands, we're actually working with very small businesses and feel the very same pains that smaller firms would feel about shouldn't we increase the fee?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully everything that Carl is going to talk about, you'll realise relates to your practice. So we're going to look at how firms are actually pricing bookkeeping and payroll and making them profitable, because we know from our members this is where quite a lot of holes are in firms' profit. And I know you've got a view on this. Where are firms losing money with their pricing? And I know it's around bookkeeping and payroll. But we're also going to give you some simple tools and techniques, and also why your marketing and sales technique may actually be causing you to attract price-sensitive clients. So before we get started, I want to do a little bit of a test. So I want everybody to go back to November 2019. And actually, you and I were sitting in San Jose about this time, weren't we, Carl? We were in California. We had no idea what was to come. But how much would have you, in November 2019, how much would you have spent on a mask and bottle of hand sanitizer? So I want you just to write that down. Write that down now. So everybody, there isn't a trick question. There isn't a right answer. Now, how much would you have spent on that in March 2020? So write that down now. And how much would you spend on it now for a mask and a bottle of hand sanitizer? Now, in the chat box, has anybody put, what are you in the chat box? Just tell us, what prices have you put? Because I'd lay quite a strong bet, Carl, that most people for a mask before the pandemic wouldn't have paid anything unless they had a seriously ill member of the family that they needed to protect.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Why on earth would you need a face mask?
Yeah. Why would you need it? I would imagine that people in March 2020 would have paid a lot of money. And I remember we had to get my parents out of Borneo in March 2020. We literally had 5 days before Borneo closed the borders. And my mother was petrified. They would have spent a huge amount of money on hand sanitizer and masks. And now we can get them everywhere again, can't you? Every Tom, Dick, Harry, Raj, whatever is selling hand sanitizer. So I think the key point I want to make here is that value is perceived by the buyer, not the seller. Often we think as accountants that we're the ones that, it isn't. It's about the buyer, not the seller. And the value isn't fixed. It can change over time.
So right, Heather. Do you mind if I just dive in with a comment on that? If that's okay. One of the biggest challenges with pricing is that we believe that value is solely about making the price higher. But actually, we all as customers have different levels of value that we put on different things. And I think the sanitizer and face mask was a perfect example. I mean, I popped in the chat that toilet rolls back then were priceless. And I do remember paying extortionate amounts of money at our local off license, who would put behind packs of 4 toilet rolls, which were more expensive than we've ever paid for a pack of 16 toilet rolls before. We needed them. But the thing is, value comes in so many different shapes and forms. And you mentioning about California reminded me of one of the times I was speaking out in California back in 2017, 2018, I think it was. And Martin Bissett gave me a paracetamol at the airport before I got on the plane because I had a raging headache. And at that point, the value of paracetamol to me would have been $10, $20, $30. I would have paid whatever was asked for it because of my pressing headache at that point. But normally, paracetamol is 29 pence. I go for the cheap and cheerful. Having said that, when it comes to how I fly, I don't necessarily fly cheap and cheerful. I base it on comfort because I'm a big lad and I need a bit of space. I'm not too good in an economy seat. When it comes to the clothes I wear, when it comes to the computer equipment I buy, and so on, there's so many different markers of value, but it's not just down to a pricing issue. It's actually about what's in my mind at the time.
Yeah, and I think the key point I want to take about this was you talked about your pressing headache. And actually, we need to find what are our clients' pressing headaches. And as you say, it's not just about price. I know one of the things you did in your firm was introduce a shift system, which worked for your staff because it meant they could do it around their own commitments. But it meant that you had somebody answering the phone from 6 a.m. in the morning, or it was quite early, wasn't it, through to almost 10 o'clock at night, which meant that your clients could always ring up and speak to someone, which was a lot of value. So what are you, in your view, what are the big mistakes accountants are making which causes them to attract price sensitive clients? Have I missed anything on this slide, or is there anything big for you?
Yeah, so I think that's pretty much sums it up. The one that I'd want to call out and just expand a little bit is the bland copy. And I'm going to tweak that slightly because I think bland copy does lead towards price sensitive clients, but also bland positioning. If you don't have a very clear position about the value you're offering, who you're offering it to, if you're a typical firm owner who boasts on their website how they look after clients locally and nationally, and they look after micro businesses and SMEs, and if you basically put yourself out to working with 99% of the world, then the reality is that the filter that people will go through to decide to work with you will be based on pounds, shillings and pence rather than whether you're the right advisor, because you've taken that I guess that layer of perceived expertise and positioning away from the decision.
Yeah, and let's be honest, if you don't differentiate yourself, then the only thing your clients and prospects will differentiate you is on price.
And just to call out points 3 and 4 on here as well. Point 3, no indication of prices on the website. I know a lot of accountants are really scared of putting their prices out there. We did a test and it was about 8-9 years ago, so it's quite out of date, but I don't think buyers' decisions have changed that much. But we split test 2 different landing pages on our website. One of them had a minimum fee that we were going to charge, and I think at the time it was £90 per month. The other one didn't have a minimum fee at all. And what we found was, whilst we got a lower number of inquiries on the one with the minimum fee, our conversion rate shot up. Yeah. So not only were we getting higher paying clients because they were primed with the minimum fee, but also it was a lot less effort to filter through them.
Yeah, and this is the thing, is by actually being really clear on your website about who you work with, who you don't work with, at the sort of the minimum fee, you get rid of those price sensitive clients. You get rid of the people that ring you up and go, can you tell me what it would charge for a set of year-end accounts? Because those are very transactional based. Give me something, I want to pay as little as possible, and then I don't want a relationship with you. And actually, if you want to grow your firm, you either have to do that, I don't want a relationship, and do it at scale, which I know, you've done a little bit with D&T, but actually you have the very much that relationship because you're working with nearly all of the franchisees within a franchise. But actually, if we want a relationship, we have to start that relationship with people that want to work with us. We've got to give people an indication. So you've just said that your average fee per client, you're dealing with the tiddlers. We're not talking about the 10 grand a month type clients or the 10 grand a year type clients. So what did you do at D&T to increase the value of your firm's service, both to your franchisors, your franchisees, and the number of small businesses you had that actually weren't a franchise or a franchisee?
Sure. So I should caveat the average fee by the fact that we have our average fee per entity. So that includes individuals who pay £200 for their self-assessment tax return. So that drags the average down quite significantly. But the fee range of what we would charge a client per year would be anything from £200 up to, I think our biggest is probably 30k, but they're few and far between. But I guess the bulk of our work would be between £750 up to 2.5. In terms of increasing the value of our services, you've nailed them here. And I think the key one that we underestimate the value of is responsiveness and touch points, and that availability and the frequency of contact. I'm very much a subscriber to option-based pricing, as you know, Heather, and giving people a choice of what they want rather than telling them what they should have. And I really like the model that the Profit First organization use, which is effectively discriminating your bronze, silver, and gold, not based on the amount of wizardry that you can offer, but actually how fast you can do the work, how frequently you're going to be in touch, and how important and valued the client is. And it really allows the client to then position themselves as well.
And I completely agree with you that on the website, if you are, if you're a virtual FD and you're at the £1,000 a month type pricing point, we're not really talking about you. Yes, you need an indication so you don't get people going, you mean you won't work for 200 quid a month? But actually, for the vast majority of us, we need to base these bronze, silver, and gold around our client personas and what people need. And as interestingly, when our members say that they lose a client, they know that it's normally because they've got a little bit lax on the responsiveness. And what we're not talking about is a lot of, I saw this particularly with the firms that sort of swallowed the more aggressive marketing ploys. That's me being very diplomatic here, where they would email their clients 4 times a month, and 3 of those 4 would be sell a service. So Ian, Chris has got a question. What's that question?
Would you like to type it into the chat box, Chris, or we can bring you in?
Not easy to bring in at the moment, so type it into the chat box, please, Chris. Love to see it. Send the message. So, and I've read award submissions that said, and we email our clients 4 times a month, and we email, and it's actually, you've got to tailor the stuff you're sending so it's genuinely helpful. Because actually, if you're just seen to be sell, that will get people to move accountant very, very quickly. So many of the people in this webinar will say that they offer really similar services to other accountants. After all, we all do a little bit of tax. We all do mostly year-end work. Some of us may do bookkeeping. What are you seeing other accountancy firms in your travels doing that are increasing the perceived value of their services? What are they doing? And is it possible to make a set of accounts more desirable or valuable?
Oh, so I guess that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Is
Yeah.
how do we make accounts and tax sexy, for want of a better phrase here? And do you know what? I think that the I guess the challenge we've got as a profession, and the challenge that most of us are facing here, is that the reality of what we do is compliance. We hear this noise about being 100% advisory, and we hear this noise about being the proactive, outside go-getter. But the reality of the buying decision and the value that's placed by the clients when they first engage us, and the reality of the majority of the services that we offer are very much transactional commodities. So what I like to see is when people take that to the next level, when they look to use the data as a platform for the advice that they then give, and they really look to move it to the next level. But the reality, Heather, and I think this is a real opportunity for most people on the call, is that most of this is marketing fluff rather than practical reality of what's going on with their clients.
Yeah. And you know what I've changed accountants rather too often, probably in my 12 years of being a business owner. And value to me is not the software. It's about, can they help me get the results? So I was put for free on Float, great piece of software. Do I go into it? No, because it's not part of my daily routine and habit. My habits with my cash flow is make sure I'm always checking it on a Friday, and that's what works for me. So you've always got to think about what is valuable for your client. What's actually valuable to me is someone tells me my tax bill really early on in the year, that I'm not waiting 6 months for somebody to push the buttons. I know that if my accountant's been doing the job right, from, we're a year end of the 31st of December, I know that we should be completely clean by the 14th of January, because that's what they should be doing. Therefore, we should be able to know our tax liability by the end of January. For us, that is value, but that might not be for other people. So the way to really understand value is think about what is it that your client base really values. And if you are not really focusing on a particular niche, and when I say niche, I'm not talking about industry sector, although that can really work. I'm talking about, is it about hyperlocal? Is it about the lifestyle stage? Is it about the structure of the organization? I'm talking legal structure as well as how the people is organized. It doesn't necessarily have to be sector. You've made a lot of money out of being franchise specialists. That's not sector specific. You do everything from sports clubs to mum and dad type. Let's get your kid into puddle ducks and swimming, right through to, big plumbing franchise operations. But that was a type of company. So one of the key things here is to really go back into your client base and understand what they need. And I bet your plumbers love the fact that they could call their accountant from 6 a.m. to 10 o'clock at night or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, but do you know what? I think there's other sides to this as well. And I want to call out what you've mentioned about tech not being something that we should overly rely on. I think that there is a risk for a lot of firms when positioning their value proposition, that they will put first and foremost on their website that they're Xero or QuickBooks or Sage certified, and but yeah, they're very whizzy on these online tools. But the reality is that you don't appoint your car mechanic because they use Mac tools or Snap-on tools. You don't hire a carpenter because they use a certain saw. The reality is that you take them on because they're used to, if you've got let's say you've got a Porsche, they're a Porsche dealer. If you've got a BMW, they're a BMW dealer. If it's somebody working on your house, they're used to working on projects of your size. So I think that positioning thing is really key. And yes, with the niches, so we have got everything from plumbers and kids clubs and so on through to high street gyms, subways, coffee shops, and so on and so forth. So it crosses across various industries. It's just the way of doing business. And what they value is the fact that we know their business inside out. But I guess most importantly, it's not the fact that we can speak to them at any time of the day and all of that stuff. It's actually that we speak their language.
Mm.
I genuinely do believe that that's what our clients buy into, is the fact they get somebody who's going to speak plain English to them, rather than trying to impress them with the latest tax knowledge or whatever.
Oh, totally. So I through my son's journey with him discovering where his dyslexic tendencies were coming out, we put a label on the fact I don't know my left and right. So I have problems with orientation. And I know, so you go left and right, that's simple, but I really have to think, what does debit and credit actually mean? Because it's an orientation thing. Is it up, down, left, right? Whereas if you just told me who owes me money, who doesn't owe me money, I have to think less about it. So I know our members, and we personally use PI card, love the ease and speed at which we can get a practice ignition proposal out to new clients. But how else can the use of practice ignition help increase the perception of value of your firm's services?
Yeah, sure. So I guess it's worth talking about why we took on practice ignition, why we moved over, and how it benefited us. I think the first thing was that we actually, and very selfishly, looked internally. And I'm sure we'll come to some of this stuff later, but we realized that for years we hadn't increased our fees because it was too much of a pitter. It's a very kind way of putting it. Too much of a pitter, going through 2,653 clients and writing to all of them and saying your fee's going up by £5, 10 quid or whatever. It just wasn't worth the hassle. And actually, it really would have been worth the hassle if we had worked out the quantum of how much that would have benefited us year after year. Secondly, it was to allow us to understand internally where our business was going forwards from a revenue perspective and so on. And we had another proposal tool beforehand, which was great at producing a flashy proposal, but it actually didn't help us run the business properly. And then finally, what was great about it was, and for the client experience, was the clarity of knowing that we were all on the same page, knowing that we'd all signed the same document electronically, we could all see it, and there was a single point of truth in the relationship, which allowed us to tweak our terms of business, both positively and negatively for us, actually, but to make sure that there's no ambiguity around refunds, around when the services were delivered and so on. Mm-hmm. So I think that just helped the customer experience, but there was no wiggle room for questions or lack of clarity. And then the bit that we didn't realise was that actually having these things like online signing and online proposals and so on is actually really important when you're putting yourself out to be a tech-led firm. Yeah. Because, when you put yourself out to be a tech-led firm, and we've built our own tech, we were the first people to use Xero and so on and so forth. We were very tech-led in certain areas, but then when you send out a Word document that someone needs to print out and sign, it kind of undermines your messaging a little bit.
Yeah, that whole we're gold partners, and by the way, here's a Word document, the proposal, or here's a separate Adobe side, and we need 5,000 things from you in the onboarding document, where actually something like practice ignition, getting it right, can help. So how do you set your fees? And I think it's fair to say there's never been more words or poor advice written on the topic of how to set your fees. There are far too many people with loud voices out there in the accountancy marketplace that are using anecdotal evidence. You may have seen my kind of putting somebody in their place at the weekend, using anecdotal evidence to make it their truth. And they will even write it in their books to make it their truth. From the ubiquitous experiment on selling beers suddenly means that we have to have 3 prices for our accountancy firm services. We don't. And actually, there's no one right answer or one right way to price your fees. It depends on your confidence, your service proposition, and your cost basis. For example, someone selling complex tax planning has a huge opportunity to value price. And I would expect any firm that has a lot of tax planning work should be naturally more profitable than most people that are sitting here, because you do have such an opportunity for a share of savings model. You can get the 50% profit margin if you do a lot of complex tax planning, which I'm imagining is not what you were able to do with D&T.
Funny you say that, because we actually used to do a lot of VAT planning for private tuition businesses, and we would charge a 25% no win, no fee effectively.
Yeah.
So we've dabbled with that, but yeah, I agree with you. There's no one right model. There's no one way. There's no one set rule book that we need to adhere to. I think that we're all, as accountants, we're equipped with the very best pricing tool in the world, and it sits between our two ears. And often we have to gauge a number of things that some are spoken, some are unspoken, that will help lead us towards where the right price could be. Now, the problem we have with that, Heather, is that unfortunately us accountants, and I can say us accountants because I am an accountant by qualification,
Yes.
we're supposed to, and I will say supposed to, because I'm actually the polar opposite of this, but we're supposed to like detail, we're supposed to like structure and systems, and we want a proven answer that's going to work. The reality is that we can't systemize the way that other people make their mind up.
No, and I think, when we talk about setting your fees, I'll be brief. It's actually, you've got to start with what your client personas actually value. And for the vast majority of people on here, the day-to-day compliance work should be a fixed fee. Business owners like myself do not want to be presented with an unexpected bill. So if you're going to do the fixed fee, now there's a lot of people going, you've got to value price that fixed fee. You and I have had the same dialogue, Carl, which basically says, whether you're charging by transaction or charging by time, or finding out your fixed fee based on your perceived chargeable time and how long you take, that is not value pricing. That is a cost plus margin model. So
it's cost plus.
All it is, and actually how high you put it normally depends on how many freebies you chuck in, whether you charge for the software or not, how desperate you are for new clients, let's be honest, and how confident you are.
And here's the problem with when you try to apply the notion of value pricing into fixed fees, and generally in a fixed fee model, value pricing doesn't form part of it. But when you try to apply the notion of value pricing, it just means value to the accountancy firm. And the risk of that is your fees go up and up and up until you hit the tipping point where the market says no. Because generally, the decision on pricing is partly cost plus, it's partly market led, etc., etc. And for us, we've tried exploring the increasing fixed fee and menu based pricing, but the risk that you have with that is that by setting an aspirational price, the person delivering it often gets struck by a lack of confidence and then winds it down.
Yes, totally.
And the risk of doing that, when you're in the meeting and the computer says £5,000 and you're thinking, you know what, Heather, I've not got the guts to say £5,000. I'm going to say £2,000 and just hope it was more than I would have charged before. The problem with that is there's a risk of eroding your margin. So what we found worked really well for us is actually to have a base cost, but we cannot go below. So have a very fixed base cost. We bake them into our proposals, but a set of accounts can't be any less than £1,000, and a tax return can't be any less than £200, and so on. And then we explore how the fee could be increased, but it absolutely cannot go below that base cost, because if it goes below that base cost, we're at risk of eroding our margin.
And here's my tip for those of you that are going, how do I set my fees? And the first thing I would do is look at your cost base in the future. Too often we set our fees based upon our cost base now, where we may have a trainee, we may work from home. So actually factor in the cost of, if you actually had to have an office, if you actually had to have if you were not actually doing the work yourself, actually set your fees based around somebody else doing the work for you, having an office, and then look at it. What does that come out? Because what that does is that gets over, because one of the first things that Ian and I tend to do with people in the club is they come in and their fees are too low because they're based on them personally doing the work, whatever. And then you just run out of time. And so base it right from the very beginning as if somebody else does the work for you. And we're not talking swanky offices, but you having to pay that somewhere between 500 and £3,000 a month for your offices. So a couple of quick tips for you. With the way our brain works, we tend to budget monthly. So don't tell people, and the annual fee is going to be this, say the monthly fee, because it's going to be more in line with what their brain is attuned to. This is a big one that the really astute members in our club do this, is in your engagement letter, what you do is you're paying for a year-round service from us. You're not paying for a set of year-end accounts and whatever. So if you decide to leave at any point in the year, there is no refund, because this is where there are so many people lose a lot of money, a huge amount of money. We've talked about price higher than your small voice of doubt. We see this a lot, Carl, don't you? Where accountants, we love numbers, of course we do, and we get obsessed with benchmarking our fees on other people. Oh, they're charging this much. Well, I couldn't go. That's I need to, put my fees down. Don't do that. Base it on your business, your cost basis, what you want to get in. Another thing that I see a lot of people, and I think, Carl, we saw this with the early cloud pioneers, that they said, we're going to disrupt the market. You probably did this, Carl, and we're going to have free phone call and email support. We're not going to charge you by the 6 minutes. And you know what? With those early pioneers, their profitability was really, really poor.
Completely. And that actually brings me on to something I just want to call out on this is, you're absolutely right. The benchmarking, the fact that costs can get driven down by the market, and there can be a perceived need to set yourself out as being a bit different to everybody else. How many people on the call offered furlough for free and then regretted it when it became really complicated and a whole lot longer than we ever expected? On the flip side, how many of us on the call were also absolutely disgusted at people exploiting it? There's a very fine balance. And when it comes to setting your fees, to me, I think we need to go back to being accountants and looking at the fundamentals of our business. When I started in practice, I remember people saying that it should be a third. So the employee should get a third, the partner should get a third, and the overhead should be a third. However, for us, that model that we actually aim for is more like 50, 25, 25. So we pay 50% to our staff, 25% overheads, 25% profits. That's still a really good way of positioning your fee for tomorrow's costs. So building in 25% as overhead, 50% for somebody else doing it, and making sure that you've got a fee that can service a business rather than give you a well-paid job. But yeah, all of these tips here, I agree 110% with.
Yeah. And I want to tell people a bit of a story before we kind of pick up the last few bits and finish. So within our business, we have an outsourced FD bookkeeper. And at one point, they didn't do the year-end accounts, and they subcontracted it to an accountant down the road. And so the whole point about having an outsourced FD bookkeeper is that at the end of the year, we have a clean trial balance. So when we were first quoted for the price of doing the year-end accounts, it seemed really reasonable, and it was reasonable based on the fact that they were an outsourced provider. This client, this accountant then drank the Kool-Aid of a proposal tool where you type in, well, there's this number of transactions, and Unfortunately, because we'd gone up by nearly 100% in a number of transactions, even though there was still a clean trial balance, it was only one more bank account. So actually, in terms of the real work to be done, there was not that much extra, because after all, they didn't have to do any of the queries. They had a clean trial balance. They didn't have to do a year-end meeting. They didn't have to do the annual year service. But because most accountants bundle that annual year service into the cost of year-end accounts, they basically said, oh, and by the way, your cost of your year-end accounts are doubling. And we called them out on it. And they said, oh, well, there's just more to do. And I'm like, well, why is there more to do? So fundamentally, you've got to really understand, what are you selling to your clients? Because for us, we needed an outsourced provider. We didn't need we need value. They decided to value price our year-end accounts, and they got told to sod off. Very nice.
And this is the thing, Heather, where the value sits. And to the average business owner, they do not value their set of accounts more if it's 1 year 140 transactions, next year 210 transactions. There's no more value in the end result, because the value is being able to sleep at night, knowing that your tax bill is manageable, knowing that you've got somebody fighting your corner. That's the stuff that business owners value. They don't value the fact that your fingers are moving around a keyboard a bit more frequently.
No, and the other thing is, I knew, because I know enough about the software, that there was 3, maybe 4 hours work at most. If there wasn't, I was paying for their inefficiency. So a couple of tips for people that, how do you improve the profitability of bookkeeping? And we need to keep this quite quick because we're running out of time. If you're still charging bookkeeping based on time, you are losing money. If you aren't charging an extra fee for starters and leavers with your payroll, you're losing money. If you're not thinking about a retainer fee or a minimum fee for your bookkeeping clients to cover off the client services software, you're losing money. So increasing existing clients' fees. We see very much that growing firms, often the owner is the one that's going, I'm the lowest paid member, because we haven't got the price right at the start. So you've already alluded to this, Carl, that you were worried about putting fees up because 2,363 clients seemed like a huge amount of work. And so we often kind of think, I don't have the time to do this. This seems to be too hard. And in the chat box, tell us why you maybe haven't done it. So what did you do, Carl, to put up the fees in your client? What was the one thing that made the difference for you to actually kind of go, I need to put the £5 on our 2,000 whatever?
Right, very simply, systemization. So we were naive enough to look at each client in isolation. And when we're talking about 20% increases, and there are cases for 20% increases, the reality for most firms is that the easiest way to get that 20% increase is 5% per year over 3 and a bit years.
Yeah, totally.
Because we all do it. We all have our Sky TV or our electricity or whatever. It all goes up by 5% per year, and we don't even bat an eyelid. The reality is for most of our clients, but if we went from £1,000 to £1,050, they're not going to bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
They might have questions if it goes up to 1,200, and that's a whole different process. So that's the easy bit. So we've got a system in place, and we've just had to be firm with it because I know that it's a substantial 6-figure, nearly 7-figure amount of money just over the last 5 years by not doing this. If I look back over those years that I've been in practice and the years we haven't done it, it's horrific. So yeah, it's about systemizing and looking at the bigger picture, and also realizing the power of compounding, because the 5% in year one, it doesn't sound like much, but it becomes 5 point something the next year, and it really does increase over time.
So, and I just want to draw it together with a few final bits of thinking. So for us, actually, this pricing bit is the bit that will hold your firm back from being scalable or not. We've talked a lot about there's no one price. Hopefully, people that have been listening have heard different ways of pricing. And we've also talked about, it is about the value you bring, but you don't determine the value. We talked about that example of that accountant who thought he was delivering value by there were a number of extra transactions so he could double the price. No, you can go away for that. But also, I know that if things are difficult, get the accountability to help you implement a price increase, or else, as you say, I know you, because if you put £5 a month on average of 2,500 people, that's 10 grand extra in monthly fees. That's you're losing out on 100 to 150 grand a year of not doing that every single year. Otherwise, you just keep meaning to do it. Ian, do you want to just share a link so that people can book a call with you if they want to discuss their pricing? So now, we love Practice Ignition. I know you love Practice Ignition, so much so you became a brand ambassador, not just a client of Practice Ignition. For those of you that would like a demo, particularly how this can make it easy to get people signed up, make yourself look professional. If you just take a scan, take a picture of this QR code, it'll go straight to that demo. That you can book a call. Our members, if they're new to Practice Ignition, get 10% off the first 12 months. Just one of the many, and I've just put a link in there. So if anybody would like to grab an opportunity for a demo. So thank you very much, Carl. I really appreciate your time. And I know you've not been well recently, so I doubly appreciate your time. And if anybody, how can people get in touch with you, Carl, if they would like to have a chat and pick your brains?
Yeah, listen, so I'd be more than happy to speak to anyone. I am and again, if you excuse my French, I'm a social media whore, so that is by far the best place to catch me. Just drop a comment on any of my posts or drop me a message. More than happy to chat to anyone.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much, Carl. I appreciate time, and we need to do this again, don't we, darling?
We do. It's been far too long since we've caught up, so we'll do this again.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. And we will be coming online in 5 minutes, well, 4 minutes now, and we'll be talking about how to radically increase the number of referrals. So those of you that are joining us for the third session of the day, we'll see you shortly. And Carl, look after yourself. Speak to everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.